because sometimes we finally get really good at having healthy conflict and debate. And then we miss the opportunity to drive clarity and closure around what's the decision we're actually committing to.
Welcome to the Working Genius podcast, where we discuss anything and everything having to do with the 6 types of working genius and how it impacts your world and your life. My name is Pat Lencioni. I'm your host. I'm joined by my regular co-host, Cody Thompson. Hello there, Cody.
Hey there, Pat.
And we've got Krista Kotrla, one of our consultants out of Texas, involved in many aspects of the Table Group. Many people out there know Krista. And we are going to have a great conversation about working genius. And what is the topic today, Cody?
Crossing the decision line.
That's right. Crossing the decision line. Well, what is the decision line? Krista, why don't you give us your quick definition of what that is?
Well, according to the Working Genius, it means we have already gone from wonder and invention and discernment and done the ID loop. And now we are crossing the decision line in between discernment and galvanizing to drive clarity and closure around the decisions that we've made. That's right.
And moving it toward enablement and tenacity,
yes,
if you will. So it's kind of that spot in the middle of activation where we've evaluated something and now it's about getting it done. Now, this seems very simple, right? It seems like, oh yeah, so we've done that. But this isn't always clear and clean. And that's what we want to talk about today is how do you know when you've got through that point, and how can you do this in a way that allows people to have clarity and doesn't get you caught up in going upstream all the time and wondering where you are?
And Pat, I would say that a lot of the leaders initially, when we present this, think the same thing, like, oh yeah, that's pretty simple and clear. And then there's all these nuances around it, or there's all these experiences that they have where they haven't actually clarified where we're at in this process. And it's caused all sorts of confusion, lack of productivity and alignment. And so the more we've talked about it, even in advance of the podcast, the more nuanced it becomes. And if we can get really good at understanding when we're crossing the decision line and how we communicate that to team members and people in the company, everything just gets better.
That's right. So the question, I guess, becomes, why do we have such a hard time with this? Because so many organizations, right, Krista? A lot of organizations out there struggle with this. And people come to meetings and like, what are we doing here? Are we debating this? Or what are we supposed to be doing? And a lot of times the answer is, I don't know. So why do so many teams and leaders and projects get confused and experience the frustration of not knowing where they are? What do you think?
Oh, I think we just don't leverage it as a communication tool to let people know which activity are we actually doing in the Working Genius. And that's just, we know intellectually when we've crossed the decision line, but sometimes we don't call it out. And then leaders can leverage that by labeling, hey, it's time to make a decision. And I've heard enough. Here's the decision. We're going to choose clarity over certainty. And I'm going to ask everyone to commit to this decision.
Right. Clarity over certainty, by the way, comes from our first book, The 5 Temptations of a CEO, where some leaders, they value perfection. Like, oh, we got to make sure it's exactly right. And I don't want to make a call until I know it's going to be exactly right. And so they wait and they wait and they wait. And essentially they're coming to those meetings and entertaining doubt and rediscernment and reinvention and re-wonder long after it makes sense. So the question is, why do they do that? Is it because they just forget to be explicit? Or is it because they want their cake and eat it too? They want to be able to go back and clean things and change things all the time? I mean, and I think it's worth asking this because there's leaders out there listening going, yeah, I think, did I forget to make it clear that we're closing this down and moving forward? Or are they like, I want to be able to have my cake and go back and do it again? Or do they feel like people are going to think they're not being nice if they say, hey, the time for input is over? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I actually love the certainty. If there's this dire pursuit for certainty from leaders, that means that any movement in the plan or any pushback, they might entertain the idea of, let's go back and see if we've made the wrong decision. If you're really so afraid of making the wrong decision that you're the very first sight of pushback from team members, or the project looks like it's moving in a direction you didn't expect, you're willing to go back and rediscern whether that was the right thing. I think that's one thing. The other thing, I think Krista mentioned this before, Pat, is like, I think there are teams, especially executive teams, where if the makeup of the team includes a lot of discernment, we talk about this all the time. We're so prone to want to do our genius that they actually just love staying there. Like, hey, let's just keep discerning. Like we're enjoying this process. And so rather than move towards galvanizing and crossing the line into implementation, we're just like pretty happy and content saying, well, let's make sure we're making the right decision. They might even, or the inverse might be true too, where if they lack discernment, they might be trying to get too much information. Like, do we have more data? Can we predict whether this is going to be successful? So I think there's actually a lot of reasons that leaders maybe miss this concept of the decision line.
Yeah. Yeah. Jim Collins wrote a book years ago about how this works in nonprofits, essentially. He talked about in the social sector, churches, government, schools, a lot of nonprofits. And in those organizations, anybody at just about any point that says, I don't think this is going to work, or I don't like this idea, oftentimes everything screeches to a halt because there's this false notion that we need constant unanimity in a decision, and anybody who's unhappy needs to be accommodated. But that happens in for-profit companies too. And basically it's just as dangerous in all of these organizations. There needs to be a leader who at some point says, hey, we've talked about it a lot. We've really entertained all these ideas. We've tolerated good conflict. I have to break the tie, or we have to commit. And from this point on, we have to implement. And I think this is, Cody, talk about the difference between implementation science and decision science, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I learned this from you, so let me teach it back to you and see if I learned it right. But that's so those two concepts sort of being in some ways like a decision line in between them, that there's two different processes, that you can be a leader that obsesses over, let's make the perfect decision, the perfect plan. And so you can spend a ton of your time saying like, well, let's over discern what the plan is. That's the decision science side. Whereas implementation science is like, we might have a mediocre plan, but if we're really good at executing the plan, that's a totally different story. And too often leaders and teams and even organizations kind of adopt one of those philosophies, right? Like either we're a perfect plan organization, or we're really good at executing without really tweaking the plan much. And it's really good to know, one or the other, and which one you are, to be wary of kind of over-indexing on one of those.
And I think understanding this decision science versus implementation science is critical to understanding the decision line. Because, and when you think about it, people that go to business school, they do case studies, and that's all decision science. And it's fun. I mean, decision science is like, what would be the right thing? And what does the data say? And I worked as a management consultant. We love doing that. But whether you make the best decision or not isn't the ultimate decider of whether you succeed. It's what do you do with that? The same thing happens like in football. People were obsessed with the NFL draft. Did they get the right guy? And the question is, are they going to know how to use the right guy? And are they going to surround him with the right people and all that? Marriage is the ultimate one. And while I think it's really important to pick the right person to get married to, I really do. There are people that picked the right person and failed because they didn't actually put work into their marriage. And there's people that pick somebody and go, gosh, well, in retrospect, we didn't see a lot of things in each other that might have been a problem, but we worked on it together and made a great marriage. I mean, there are arranged marriages that work better than people who have complete freedom to choose the right person and it doesn't work. I think those are good explanations of why what you do with a decision is just as important, if not more important, than the decision itself.
Yeah. And Krista, there's a poster on the wall behind you. And I love this because you've connected this decision line, both from a invention, galvanizing, you mentioned or invention discernment loop, and then the galvanizing part of this, but you've connected it to the 5 dysfunctions. I'd love for you to just talk about the relationship between like, what does it look like, the decision line in terms of working genius, but related to the 5 dysfunctions.
Right. When we've got both models up on flip charts, so the working genius, we draw that orange dotted line between discernment and galvanizing. And what does that represent? The decision, when the decision happens, and the courage to call that out. Same thing on the 5 dysfunctions, the pyramid, the triangle. That orange dotted line goes between conflict and commitment, because sometimes we finally get really good at having healthy conflict and debate. And then we miss the opportunity to drive clarity and closure around what's the decision we're actually committing to. And so the one tool or mechanism that really helps teams and leaders is that end of meeting discipline to drive that clarity for both models.
You know, what's interesting, I was just thinking about this, Krista, and I love how you do that it gets up into accountability then later. Because what happens in organizations is somebody will say, well, you didn't deliver on what we agreed to. And they're like, yeah, because as I started thinking about it, I just didn't think that was the right decision anymore. And that's where a leader has to go, hey, that was not your job to revisit that. And you should have done that a long time ago if it was going to. I'm holding you accountable to what we agreed on, because people will often try to talk their way out of not being held accountable by saying, well, I think we should go revisit whether this is the right thing. And that's not what the point of this is. And that's hard for leaders to say.
Well, and I want to touch on, I don't want to skip over 2 things that you mentioned, Krista, because we say the word end of meeting discipline, and this is a Working Genius podcast. So I don't know how many people really know what we mean when we say that. And so just like really succinctly, end of meeting discipline is this idea that we end all of our meetings at least 5 minutes early so that we can clarify the things that happen during the meeting. And one of the things that we're always pushing leaders and teams to clarify is this idea of what did we discuss? What were topics in the meeting that we discussed? And that involves a lot of the discernment side of that. And then what did we decide? And so what's amazing is if all you did was that at the end of your meetings, the practical implications of knowing if you've crossed the decision line would be astronomical for every leader. It's just say, hey guys, I know we just had an hour meeting. What were the topics we discussed? Let's lay them out. Did we make any decisions based on those conversations? And that alone would clarify in spades for the rest of the team, like, oh, or what often happens is at the end, somebody on the team says, yeah, we decided to move forward with that initiative. And another person says, well, I didn't decide that.
Yeah.
And then we know where we have to go back and say like, okay, we've not actually crossed the decision line on this. Let's go have another meeting where we're having more conflict, doing some more discernment.
Yeah, we've seen this over the years, Cody, working with clients where at the end of that meeting, they're like, hey, can we just get out of here? We're like, no, let's just clarify what we decided. And people are like, hey, we all speak in the same language here. We know what we decided. Okay, so what do you guys think about this? And 2 of the people go, oh yeah, we're going to go out and announce that to our people right now. And other people are like, oh no, I do not think we are ready to do that. I mean, it happens as often as not that people assume that they're all on the same page and they're not. So if you don't do that, then you've got people that think you've crossed the decision line and it hasn't happened. And so even with the best of intentions, you're like, I didn't know we were beyond that decision point. So that end of meeting discipline is so important.
There's one other question that goes with the end of meeting discipline. In addition to the what did we decide, it's really helpful when the team aligns around what do we say or not say, because that actually gets them into the actual galvanizing conversation around what are we actually going to tell people, because there may be some decisions made and we actually shouldn't tell anybody yet until a couple of things are fleshed out. And so that one's also really critical to get them into galvanizing specifically or not galvanize all at the same time.
And even if you fleshed everything out, it just might not be the right time. You know, it might be a bad decision. And you mentioned the galvanizing. Now we're back to the Working Genius podcast because galvanizing, there's a few different kinds of galvanizing that takes place. And that's another issue here. And that is people that are galvanizers are really good at convincing people of things, right? And so you could say, hey, Cody, I need you to convince people in the office this is the right decision. And he likes doing that. But there's a different kind of galvanizing, which is I'm going to give you direction and rally you around something, not because I'm going to convince you. The time of convincing you is over. And so if you're a galvanizer, you might be like, well, if they're doubting it, I'll just keep selling. And that's where the leader has to say, no, the selling time is over. Now we're just giving you clarity. So if you're asking questions, at that point, you should be asking questions about how we're going to do this, not whether or not it was the right thing or not.
Yeah, and Krista, you said something as we're preparing for this. You said this concept of the decision line might be hardest for leaders who have discernment and galvanizing as a genius. And I think it's related to what you just said, Pat, which is I find myself having to clarify, like, yes, because I'm a discerner and I think I know what might be the right way forward, I use galvanizing as a convincing mechanism for people. Like, oh, I can, in this meeting, really try to convince people. Or I can use it after the decision line as let's get people motivated around this. And if I'm not clear about how I'm using that, it can get really confusing.
Hey, I got to think a WG would struggle with this too, because it might be probably like, oh, wow, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. Here's something that we talked about at a previous podcast, and that is, what about people that are like, oh, so after the decision line, so I'm an ID. It's like, okay, my work here is done. And the key here is no, that's where we have to use our lowercase I and D. See, there's still a place for W, I, and D after the decision line is crossed, but it's in asking questions and coming up with ideas about how to implement the plan, not whether the plan should be implemented at all. And that might seem subtle. It's huge. The difference between using your capital W, I, and D and your lowercase W, I, and D is the difference between unnecessary conflict, delay, and frustration, and actually more unity and speed and effectiveness. It's huge, that difference.
And Krista, I think you had a great story that sort of illustrated that with a real life client that you were working with, right? That product company.
Right, where they had put out a product, it didn't see the results that they were expecting. So they had to get back into the executive leadership team room. And the leader was asking, what are we going to do? This isn't getting the results. So they went back over the decision line, back to invention and discernment.
Capital I
Capital
and D.
I, D. So what are we going to do? And he demanded debate from everyone on the team. So some people wanted to sunset the product. Some people wanted it to relaunch, but with a whole new marketing plan. Some people advocated for better customer education, that was what, so they spent time figuring out what's the real problem to solve to get the results that we want. And then instead of trying to drive for consensus, he had the courage to, after he heard from everyone, and they were not in agreement, to say, I've heard enough. Here's the decision. Now, can you support this decision? Can you support this decision? Can you support this decision? So he was driving clarity and closure on the decision, but took that extra 60 seconds to ask for the commitment so that people would leave the room truly committed to, I guess, behaviorally galvanize. Even if they intellectually didn't love the decision, they were now committed and they were going to back it up with their actions.
You know, and this is one of the interesting things too. And they did not put on the tail lights and go back, or the backup lights, you know. And this is something, and I remember Bill Bridges talks about that in transition management. When you take people through a transition, you go through that transition and sometimes it doesn't work. And then you go transition again to the next new thing. It's not that you're backing up and reversing yourself. And this is one of the things, because I think it's great when companies make a decision, they boldly try to implement it. And then Microsoft did this years ago around the internet when they were going to create their own private network. This is right when the World Wide Web was coming around. And they were like, no, we're not going to go to that public thing. We're going to create our own internet. And they went after it hard. And soon after that, they said, this is not going to work. And they shifted, but they shifted faster. They implemented and then shifted faster than other companies that were kind of wimpy and constantly afraid. So even if you make the wrong decision, you often learn from that if you commit to it faster than people that don't make a decision, that never declare the decision line and are constantly keeping everything open for discussion. General Patton once said, a good plan violently executed is better than a perfect plan executed too late. And sometimes even a bad plan, not in war maybe, but executed well, and then you learn so much from it that you can actually adjust faster than your competitors who are back there debating forever, stuck in discernment land.
Krista, you used another word that I think speaks to why leaders maybe aren't clear or suffer from this not knowing what side of the decision line they're on. You said the word consensus. And, we talked earlier about certainty. That's one thing that prevents a leader from really diving in, and that Patton quote kind of speaks to that. But this idea of consensus is another thing that I think prevents people from moving across the decision line. I love the example that you gave of the leader that was like, hey, we're not here for consensus. We're here for clarity. Can I get your buy-in to this? We're going to move into the galvanizing stage and really kind of execute this, whether we think it's the perfect plan or not. And so that's another thing I think leaders should watch out for, is a desire to get everybody. Discernment is not about consensus. It's not about getting to the same answer with everybody on the team. It's about picking the right answer and then moving across the decision line to commitment and execution.
Yep.
And I think a lot of leaders or meetings can be more clear. Which side of the decision line are we on? So that we have the right decision and conversation right now. Because we've seen
a great point.
A leader is rolling out a policy and the team spends 40 minutes debating and trying to discern if this is a good decision or not. And then it was my colleague, your brother Casey, that just said, hey, I'm just curious, is this actually a legal policy that we have any say into changing? And the answer was no. So the team had just spent 40 minutes trying to reopen that as a decision. And the reality is, this was a galvanizing conversation, and we should have been spending 45 minutes figuring out how to enable that getting implemented.
This is so interesting. There's so many nuances here. I think one of the biggest things here is clarity is kind.
Mm-hmm.
Clarity. If you want to serve the people you lead, be clear about where you are and what's been decided. And the funny thing is, in an organization, people really want the leader to go, hey, you guys, the discussion's over. Let's move forward. And even though they're like, well, I would probably like to have a little bit of this. I'm just glad you're making a decision. So in my church, we have a new pastor. And the first time he got up to speak, he was like, so some people say when you're a new pastor in a parish, you shouldn't make any decisions for the first year. I don't agree with that. We're going to move forward. I've talked to my team and we're going to do this and this and this. And he was very blunt. And he goes, he even said, I'm not here to be your buddy. I'm here to get you to heaven. And so we're going to be decisive. We're going to make decisions. Do you know how many people I talked to that said, oh, this is going to be great? Whereas sometimes in the church, they're like, we're going to have a meeting in the parish hall and we're going to get flip charts and everybody's going to write down their wishes and it's like, oh no, this is going to be one of those stupid things where everybody puts a thing on the wall and none of it gets done, but everybody feels like they got heard. People want a leader who listens and says, let's be decisive, and goes forward. And it's so funny because so many times I know as a leader, I feel like, oh no, they want me to keep everything open for more discussions, when in fact, deep down inside, they're saying, please just make it clear. And so that's why when people say, where are we in the decision? Sometimes it's good for the leaders to go, no, we're beyond the decision point. We're moving forward. And people are like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think we use this phrase as it relates to 5 dysfunctions about people need to weigh in order to buy in. That's at the executive team level. And I think in some ways, some of the ways that leaders can use this decision line concept is to say, hey, let me tell you what we started with, what we were trying to solve. Even use Working Genius as a communication tool, like you alluded to, Krista, which is like, here's what the question that we were trying to answer. We came up with all these possible invention solutions, so now we went to invention and we kind of discerned that this is the right way. So you're almost garnering buy-in by helping them understand what you said no to and what you said yes to. Because when you're just handed the playbook without any context, sometimes there's immediate pushback. But if they understand, like, hey, the executive team thought through all of these decisions, all of these possible solutions, we arrived at this and we need your buy-in now. It's not like let's throw everybody's wishes on a flip chart and try to accommodate everybody and be equally disappointed in the outcome.
Krista said this before our call today. She said, anticipate people's objections. And what you can do is you can say, hey, we're rolling this new thing out. Now I realize we'd love to be able to get everybody's input in the company, but that doesn't make sense. None of you would want to work at a company where we did this. Just so you know, we argued, we thought about it from all these different perspectives. We tried to take in as much input as we could, but now we've arrived at this decision. We're past that decision line. So now people aren't going to be like, well, I'm not going to support it. As long as you told them how you got there.
Right.
The
The best galvanizers tell that WID story.
Yes.
You don't have to invite everyone into it, but they tell the WID story really well so that we trust every activity was walked through. And even if I'm a WD, a wonder discerner that wasn't in the room, if I hear the wonder that or the untapped potential we're trying to solve for and the discernment process, then I can get on board with that. So even the example with your pastor, he kind of, at least in this example, shared the story of I met with my leadership team. Here's kind of what we're trying to solve for. And he explained the WID process. So that's how anybody can galvanize, even if it doesn't bring you joy or energy and fulfillment naturally, as long as you get better at telling that WID story to overcome objections and bring people along in those first 3 activities.
And if you do have employees that say, oh no, I should be involved in the WID of this, and I'm deeper in the organization, and they say, well, we can't have you do that because not everybody can do it. And they go, no, I want to be. That's okay if they leave, because that might be a humility violation, which gets us to Humble, Hungry, Smart, which is a whole different book. And that's not what we're here to talk about. But Krista, this was great. We really appreciate you introducing this to us and pushing us on this and the way you described it. And I think this can be really important. I love what you said. Ask the question, where are we in the decision-making process? Have we gone over the line or not? And that's a huge opportunity for every team.
That's great. Thank you for having me. I hope this helps a lot of leaders drive more clarity and get the teams around them excited because they know how to show up into those different conversations.
Yeah. And avoid unnecessary angst.
Right. Yep.
All righty. Thanks, everybody. Cody, Krista, thanks for being here. We love talking to our Working Genius people out there. We have more than 5,500 people that have been certified in Working Genius. And there's 3 classes a month, and they fill up. And there's openings a couple months from now. So look into that if you want to get certified.
And Krista's one of the master facilitators. So you can learn from her field experience even more if you do that.
That's right. Request her by name. No, you can't do that. You can't do that. But yeah, so the certification program is a fabulous way to go deeper and then to take this out into your world and into your business. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll talk to you next time on the Working Genius podcast. God bless.